Hello, everyone. Great honor to be with you today, and thank you very much for extending an invitation to me to speak. I promise I will not bore you with too much definitions, but I just feel like it's very important to kind of lay the groundwork very, very quickly with a bit of context here. It's important to denote that the Gaza genocide is not isolated, and that it is indeed the climax of a century-long settler colonial project. This is important because it goes against the wisdom, so-called wisdom of mainstream media, and all of these kind of poor contextualization of what has been taking place in Gaza since October 7. No, what Israel is doing in Gaza is not a response to the assault of October 7, 2023. To the contrary, what happened on October 7 was itself a response to the Israeli siege, successive Israeli wars, and a long history of dispossession, ethnic cleansing, violence, and all the rest. So that's an important point that needs to be made. The other point is that what is taking place in Gaza, unlike what Netanyahu and others are saying, and by extension the American government and mainstream media and all of that, this is not a war to eliminate a political faction. It is a war against the Palestinian people. How do we know that? Well, we know that because Israel's behavior towards the Palestinians, the ethnic cleansing, the killing, the genocide, the incremental genocide, and all of that, it's been taking place for decades before Hamas came into, was formed as a political movement. I mean, when did Hamas become Hamas? That was in the late 1987, at the start of the first Palestinian uprising in Gaza and the West Bank. If indeed this is a question of Hamas, how do we explain everything that happened since the Balfour Declaration to the Nakba, 1948, all the way until the inception of Hamas in 1987? How do we explain all the massacres, all the killings, all the ethnic cleansing, the destruction of villages, the destruction of orchards, the theft of the land, the expansion of settlements, the racism and the apartheid? How do we explain all of that? So obviously this is not just about Hamas. Hamas represents the brand. Israel fights against brands. At one point, the brand was socialism. I mean, some of you may already know this fact, that when Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982 to destroy Palestinian resistance, but also Lebanese resistance, the claim that Mr. Ariel Sharon, the late Israeli prime minister, known as the bulldozer and very vile man and a terrible war criminal, made the claim to the Americans that you need to support us because we are fighting communism on your behalf. So the brand at the time was communism. The brand changes. After 9/11 and the terrorist attacks, then the brand became something else, and that is Islamic fundamentalism. And this is why Hamas served as a very convenient kind of, very convenient excuse or pretense for Israel to rebrand its fight against the Palestinians as a fight against supposed Islamic terrorism and fundamentalism. And that's where the era that we entered, where all Islamic groups are the same. Hezbollah is the same as Hamas. Hamas is Taliban. Taliban is Al-Qaeda. Later, everybody is ISIS, and so forth. It's all nonsense, of course, and anyone who knows history will know that. So that's a very important caveat that I think is worth mentioning here. Now let's talk about Palestinian resistance. Palestinian resistance is not about guns and bullets. I've said that many times, and I will continue to say this. Because again, as historians, we have kind of looked at the various periods in Palestinian history in which resistance was particularly thriving and all of that. Gaza in particular has been resisting since the very, very start. Prior to the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 1948 by Zionist militias and gangs with the help of British colonialists at the time, Gaza at the time was a place in which it was somewhat sparsely populated. Mostly aristocratic families living in Gaza City, Khan Yunis and all of that, and largely Bedouin, nomadic tribes that lived in the rest of Palestine, the Gaza Strip area, mostly in the central areas. The term Gaza Strip itself is a new invention. Prior to that, it was called the Gaza District, and it was naturally connected to the rest of the landscape of Palestine, the socio-economic landscape, the natural landscape, the demographic landscape. So the Gaza District was today's so-called Gaza Strip all the way to, further south to the city of Asqalan, later named Ashkelon, and all of that. Later on, it became known as the Gaza Strip, and it basically became a prison that is closed off by the Egyptians on this side of the Sinai Desert, and of course hermetically closed off from Israel. The siege on Gaza is not a new phenomenon. Gaza has been under a protracted Israeli siege since the very start. The conversation is not about whether a siege has taken place or not, but the extension or the nature of that siege. The siege since 2006-7, when Hamas won the democratic elections in Palestine, became a hermetic siege, a complete close off in which Palestinians, or complete closure in which Palestinians became an experiment for Israel. An experiment in which Palestinians were subjugated to a calorie count according to Israeli media. Israel thought, what is the amount of calories that Palestinians would need to survive, but to be at the verge of kind of malnutrition? That's the calorie count. And the Israeli media speaks openly about it, based on leaked documents and reports by the Israeli officials. Haaretz in particular had some interesting reporting about this issue. But the siege has been there for a very, very long time. It's just the nature of the siege has changed as of late. This is just to highlight the fact that two things are true about Gaza. Resistance has started from the very beginning, and the siege has been there from the very beginning. And obviously there is a very intrinsic link between Palestinian resistance and the Israeli siege, between Palestinian resistance and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 1948, between Palestinian resistance and Israeli violence throughout the years. That did not just start with the war of 2008, but has been taking place since the very, very beginning, when Israel put Gaza under siege and began the process of raiding Gaza, killing Gazans, fighters and civilians alike, and so forth and so on. In 1967, Israel occupied the Gaza Strip. And that occupation meant that there had to be some kind of an attack on the Palestinian people and their civilian infrastructure, because Israel knew very well, and it is true, that Palestinian resistance does not matter if it does not have this kind of culture of resistance, this social embrace. And this is why I keep saying that you cannot reduce resistance in Palestine to guns and bullets, because look at the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority has anywhere between 60 to 80,000 supposedly fighters, security officers, whatever you want to call them. Not a single bullet has been fired at the Israeli army that is wreaking havoc in the West Bank, that is killing and kidnapping and burning and destroying and demolishing and attacking and raiding and arresting and so forth and so on. Not a single bullet by about 80,000 officers. So if it's about guns and bullets, the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority in particular should be the greater danger for Israel. No, it's about the context, the cultural context of that resistance, in which armed resistance is only one of numerous other facets. Resistance in Palestine is the resistance in everyday work. The doctors, the teachers, the journalists, the artists, the civil defense workers, the ordinary people, their language, their poetry, their music, their songs, their art. Now, it doesn't mean we should fall into the trap of neglecting other forms of resistance and just focus on the kind of resistance that might be sellable to, say, to an American audience or to a Western audience. Palestinians don't resist only through art and song and music. And they don't just resist through teachers and journalists and doctors. They resist in all of these things and all of these elements together, including armed resistance. In Palestinian culture, we call this muqawama. Muqawama translates to English as resistance, but the cultural connotation is entirely different. Because within the cultural connotations of the word resistance in the English language is that something that can be divided into various types. Armed resistance, not armed resistance. Popular resistance versus peaceful resistance versus violent resistance, and so forth and so on. This is convenient in the West, and there's a long history regarding this particular division and why it applies to Palestinians differently than other anti-colonial movements. But in Palestinian cultures, we don't have these divisions. And if these divisions exist in the Arabic language, it's a new phenomenon related to, kind of Western-funded projects and movies and films and that sort of thing. In Palestine, resistance is muqawama, and there's only one form of muqawama that allows every member of civil society, every member of society, in fact, to participate in a various capacity. If that muqawama does not exist, Palestinians wouldn't be able to actually fight. And if the fighting happened without that social embrace, it would have been isolated and marginalized and shunned a long time ago. So you need all of these elements together in order for resistance or muqawama in Palestinian culture to make a difference. Historically, Gaza has been at the heart of Palestinian resistance. Because, and this is an argument I've also made in the past, that because we have approached our understanding to this so-called conflict in using wrong terminologies and wrong historical context, we committed a great sin of isolating Gaza as if it's irrelevant to this so-called conflict. Because conflicts, from an academic point of view, whether you are pro, the old colonial discourses or the anti-colonial discourses, the issue is always seen from pure material components. Israel wants the land and the Palestinians have the land, but they want the land without the people, so they want to push the people out of the land. Well, Gaza doesn't have much land. It doesn't have much natural resources. So why is Gaza fighting? What is Gaza fighting for? And this is where the issue that we should be paying attention to needs to be kind of placed back onto the fore of this argument. That Palestinians don't just fight for land, and they do. Because without land, basically there is no potential Palestinian liberation, freedom, and statehood. But Palestinians also fight for other elements here. Karama, dignity. They fight for their dignity. They fight for their family. They fight for their hurriya, their freedom. There are so many elements to it that cannot be measured in material sense. Otherwise, it makes no sense of why Gaza is fighting today. I mean, all of Gaza is being destroyed. Some estimations that says that about 600,000 Palestinians would have been dead by the end of the war. So we are looking here at frightening numbers that from a material calculation, it makes no sense why Palestinians are fighting. They are better off maybe going somewhere else to preserve whatever lives that are still there in Gaza. But they are still fighting, and they are refusing to leave Gaza. They are not making demands to leave Gaza. I mean, we know that. What are they fighting for? They are fighting for concepts that are much greater than our capacity to understand beyond the material component, the land itself as a land. And this is something that we need to also keep in mind. This is where the concept of steadfastness in Palestinian culture, we call it sumud. Sumud, again, it's not a practical term that can be measured as an element of material strength. Israel has all the weapons. Israel has all the most sophisticated killing machine uh, the latest of American technology, the latest of French, British, Italian technology, and Palestinians have sumud. How do you explain that from a material point of view? What is sumud? How do you translate that? How much do you sell and buy sumud for? Can you go to a country like the Israelis keep going to the Americans for billions of dollars, worth of weapons? Can the Palestinians go and buy sumud somewhere else? No, you can't, because it's an innate process. It's a collective experience that has been cemented in Palestinian culture through not just decades, but I would even argue hundreds of years of a culture of resistance, a community that is rooted in that land, as rooted as the olive trees of Palestine. So that's why I'm really hoping that we could challenge some of the language that is being thrown at us, and sometimes we struggle with that to the point that we started kind of creating separations. Not all Palestinians are, believe in armed struggle, or not everybody elected Hamas, and we kind of enter into this kind of, that kind of dividing language in order for us to create this discourse that is marketable, a brand that could, withstand the lies and the propaganda of Israel. But you need to walk away from that entirely and try to think about things from a Palestinian point of view. I think this is the greatest service we can do for Palestine and the Palestinians, and that is just to serve the role of the conveyors. We convey. We serve as a platform to amplify their voices, to give them the space to speak, and not by being selective about it, bringing the Palestinians that are not too much of a liability, because at the end of the day, you're actually hurting the Palestinian struggle, because you are presenting a misguided understanding of what is happening in Palestine and why people are fighting and why they are dying for their beliefs. So don't fall into that trap, and try to understand things from a Palestinian point of view as much as you can, and also from a historical point of view that is grounded in people's history, and that has always been my focus as a historian. So you have to also remember these terminologies. Muqawama, meaning resistance. In Palestinian culture, it means something else, and it can be expressed in every possible way, from a bullet to a song, from a canvas to a doctor saving a life, and so forth and so on. This is why that kind of takes me to my final point here about global solidarity. I believe that international solidarity is key. We are inspired by civil societies and even worker unions, such as the Italian dock workers and many other unions who are now being revitalized in their solidarity with Gaza. They are being revitalized even as unions and as groups that are relevant to their own society. I mean, look at Italy, for example. The unions have been marginalized for such a long time, especially since the rise of the Second Republic in Italy, and the kind of the complete fall into the American political camp following the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. But if you look at Italian society right now, same thing with Spanish society, by the way. If you look at these societies, you are going to find that workers and unions are actually becoming so relevant, not only as a subject of global solidarity, but only in their own societies as well. And my hope is that this momentum is going to continue to be built around Gaza first, but around other global issues that that finally would allow these groups that have been marginalized for decades to once again become relevant and significant, in fact, political actors in their own societies. International solidarity does not, of course, mean the replacement of the Palestinians. Palestinians are the ones doing the resistance. Palestinians are the ones who are creating the discourse. Palestinians are the ones who are shaping history. International solidarity is this global embrace, if you will, that is shielding Palestinians and the Palestinian discourse, and is amplifying the voices of the Palestinians, and they are advocating change within their own societies and their own governments. And we have what civil society has done. I know sometimes civil society's work does not appear to be as significant as it is. you hear people say things like, well, millions of people are protesting, but nobody is listening, for example. Or, what's the point of these boats going to Gaza knowing that Israel is going to send them back? But what we don't understand, that these are not isolated events. These are just part of a chain reaction that has been going on for such a long time. I mean, all the advocacy that's happening by civil society, without civil society's research and work, a case against Israel at the ICC would have not been possible. And, at the ICJ. I mean, from the legal platforms to the medical platforms to the political platforms, that is translating to action in Spain, in Norway, in other countries in Europe. Civil society was the epicenter of all of this. So don't discount civil society thinking it is, what's the point of it? When you go to protest and you chant, guess what? First of all, you've become empowered. You find yourself not an isolated voice, but part of a much larger constituency. But you also start organizing and mobilizing and networking within that space. And everybody takes all of this into his and her own, her own field. Students go back to universities to work from there, to push Israel or to divest from Israel through universities. The lawyers go back to their offices and initiate legal action against Israel and other Zionist entities and organizations. The doctors organize and mobilize to make sure that some minimal amount of medicine is able to enter Gaza, and so forth and so on. So your work is so significant. And in fact, I would say, just to know how significant your work has been, is that if you remove international solidarity from that equation, you know what would have happened? Gaza would have been completely on its own. Nobody would even be talking about it. Yes, the discourse is coming out of Gaza itself. Yes, Palestinians are able to narrate their own history and reality better than anyone else, with no international media being in Gaza to help us understand what's going on. Gaza is single-handedly defeating the Zionist discourse of 100 plus years. But that would have not been possible if it were not for you conveying that message, carrying the message, amplifying the voices, and using the messages out of Gaza to mobilize politically in your own locality, your own city, your own country, and internationally. So thank you very much for all the work that you have been doing, and thank you for staying the course. We need to stay the course, not only until the war is over, because after the war, after the genocide is over, after the bodies are collected and buried, some other challenge is going to happen here. There will be massive attempts to intervene in the Palestinian discourse, to make Palestinians look liable to their own problems and their own disaster, and to be blamable for their own genocide. Don't allow them to do that. Don't allow people to divide our movements between various types of resistance and this and that, and then we turn against each other. Don't do that. Don't capitalize on that ideologically either by, entering into ideological blame game. To the contrary, use this to benefit in your own mobilization within your own society. We are stronger together. Because of Gaza, many civil society organizations and groups and communities and unions and workers are much stronger in their own environments. But we are also stronger because of you. So let's keep that balance, and let's not turn against each other under any circumstance. Let's remain focused and vigilant and understand that the next coming battle in Gaza, well, Gaza itself is going to engage in the process of rebuilding. Our battle is to rebuild the discourse around new priorities, and the priorities are the ones coming from Gaza and the Palestinian people themselves. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me and for inviting me as well. All the best.